Samantha had always been a woman of ambition, and when she landed a new job at a prestigious marketing firm, she was thrilled. It wasn't just the opportunity to build her career, but also the promise of a fresh start. Her husband, Chris, had always been her rock, providing support and encouragement through each of her professional milestones. When she received the invitation to the company's annual party, she was excited. It was a chance to mingle with her colleagues, show off her new role, and be part of the team. However, despite her eagerness, there was one decision that made her feel uneasy. She chose to attend the party alone. Chris, busy with work, couldn't join her. Though it felt like an exciting opportunity, the thought of navigating an office event solo began to bring a wave of discomfort. She had never attended a work event without him by her side, and now, with the party fast approaching, the anticipation of stepping into a crowd of strangers without her husband left her feeling oddly vulnerable. The excitement was beginning to give way to a knot of uncertainty. The venue was grand, a sleek, modern hotel ballroom decorated with soft lighting, elegant floral arrangements, and the hum of conversations filling the air. The party was in full swing, with laughter and clinking glasses echoing off the walls. Samantha, in a dress she had carefully chosen, felt a little out of place amidst the sea of confident, well-dressed professionals. The atmosphere was lively, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow standing at the edge of a world she hadn't yet fully entered. She was still the new girl, her name whispered in the hallways, and her face still unfamiliar to many. Colleagues in groups chatted and laughed, making it look effortless, but Samantha felt like an outsider. She smiled and joined in, trying to fit in, yet the absence of Chris beside her left a subtle void that she couldn't ignore. She excused herself to the bar, hoping a drink would calm her nerves, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the emptiness of standing in the room alone. She reminded herself that it was a chance to network, to make connections, yet a gnawing sense of discomfort lingered. With each passing moment, the once thrilling excitement began to feel more like an overwhelming challenge. As the night wore on, Samantha tried to shake off the growing discomfort, mingling with colleagues and forcing herself to engage in light-hearted conversation. The initial awkwardness seemed to ease as she shared polite exchanges, but it wasn't long before things took an unsettling turn. A male colleague, Mark, stood too close during their conversation, his hand brushing against her arm with each laugh. She tried to brush it off with a nervous chuckle, chalking it up to his jovial nature, but something felt off. Another colleague, Luke, made an overly friendly comment about how nice she looked tonight. Samantha smiled, but the words seemed to linger in the air longer than they should have. A few other men approached, their behavior oddly familiar, as though they felt entitled to invade her personal space without invitation. She laughed it off, reminding herself that it was just the buzz of the party. Yet, with each lingering touch and each comment that seemed to cross the line from friendly to personal, the unease in her chest deepened. She glanced around, hoping to find someone she knew well, but the crowd felt like an impenetrable sea of unfamiliar faces. Something wasn't right, and it was getting harder to ignore the tension building within her. As the evening wore on, the drinks flowed more freely, and the atmosphere began to shift. What had once been a cheerful gathering now felt charged with an undercurrent of something darker. The noise in the room grew louder, conversations became more animated, and people began to relax, perhaps too much. Samantha, feeling slightly disoriented from the wine, was caught off guard when Greg, a senior colleague, approached her. With a smirk, he commented on her dress, a remark that might have seemed innocent in another context, but the way he said it made her skin crawl. "That dress makes you look irresistible," he said, his voice too low. Samantha stiffened, forcing a polite smile, but her instincts screamed that something wasn't right. The remark was not an isolated incident. As the night wore on, more colleagues joined in, their comments shifting from casual to uncomfortable. She felt the walls closing in as her space was invaded, and laughter erupted around her like a chorus she didn't belong to. It was as though the group of men was feeding off each other's energy, each one more emboldened by the other's behavior. Samantha felt trapped, unable to escape without drawing attention to herself. Her stomach churned, but she tried to maintain composure, hoping the moment would pass. Instead, it only seemed to escalate, leaving her with the sinking feeling that she was no longer in control of the situation. With her heart pounding in her chest, Samantha excused herself from the group, desperate to put some distance between herself and the escalating discomfort. She weaved through the crowd, her mind racing as she tried to find a quiet spot to collect her thoughts. The restroom seemed like the only sanctuary where she could gather herself and breathe. Her steps were quick and purposeful as she made her way down the hallway, hoping the cool, neutral space would offer her some relief. Once inside, she leaned against the sink, trying to steady her breath. Her mind replayed the moments of unease, and a cold knot of fear began to settle deep in her stomach. Reaching for her phone, she was about to call Chris when she realized her phone was still in her purse, which she had left in the cloakroom. Panic flared as she stood in the restroom, suddenly feeling more isolated than ever. She thought about going back to retrieve it, but the idea of facing the crowd again, especially after everything that had happened, made her stomach turn. She needed to calm down first, but with her phone out of reach, she felt helpless. When Samantha exited the restroom, she hoped that the worst of the night was over, but as she turned the corner toward the cloakroom, her breath caught in her throat. The group of men she had been avoiding was standing in the hallway, blocking her path. Greg was at the front, his expression darker than before. He took a step toward her, a sly grin spreading across his face. "We were wondering where you went," he said in a low voice. "We were just about to start a game. Come on, join us." The tone of his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Samantha froze, her mind racing for an excuse to escape, but there was no way around them. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to smile, hoping to diffuse the situation, but the growing tension in the air felt suffocating. She felt an overwhelming urge to run, but there was nowhere to go, and her body refused to move. Something about this encounter felt off, and the danger of it settled into her gut. It wasn't just an awkward moment anymore. She could feel the shift in the air, a sense of something far more sinister unfolding. Before she could react, the group of men closed in on her, blocking every possible exit. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a thick silence that made her feel like prey in a trap. Greg's hand brushed against her arm as he stepped closer, his presence towering and imposing. Samantha's breath caught in her throat as she realized the weight of her situation. She tried to take a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the hallway seemed to close in, and the men surrounded her, their gazes intense and predatory. She tried to look around, desperately searching for someone who might intervene, but the hallway was empty. Fear surged through her veins as she realized she was alone in this. Greg's voice cut through her thoughts. "We'll have some fun, don't worry." The cold, calculating tone made her stomach churn. They were no longer playing around. They were closing in, and it was becoming clear that they were not about to let her go easily. Samantha felt her panic rise as they began to push her toward a back room, her mind screaming for her to escape, but her body was frozen with fear. She was trapped. The moment was a blur. Samantha managed to break free from their grasp, her body propelled by pure adrenaline as she shoved past one of the men. She bolted down the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest as she ran toward the restroom. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Her feet barely touched the ground as she sprinted through the hall, her eyes scanning for anyone who might help. As she rounded a corner, she collided with someone. It was Lauren, a staff member she had briefly met earlier in the night. Lauren's eyes widened as she took in Samantha's distressed expression. Without a word, Lauren stepped forward and grabbed her arm, leading her down a side hallway toward a back office. "You're okay now," Lauren said softly, her voice steady and reassuring. Samantha didn't speak. She didn't need to. The relief that flooded her in that moment was enough. Lauren shut the door behind them, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Samantha allowed herself to breathe. She was safe. Samantha left the party early, the weight of what had happened still heavy on her shoulders. The drive home was a blur, her mind replaying the events over and over as she tried to make sense of what had transpired. When she walked through the door, Chris immediately noticed the look on her face. His eyes softened in concern as he reached for her. "What happened?" he asked gently, pulling her into a hug. Samantha's eyes filled with tears as she explained the night, her voice shaky. Chris listened without interruption, his concern never wavering. He didn't press for more details, just held her tightly as she cried. "You don't have to go back there if you don't want to," he whispered. The comfort of his arms was a balm to her frayed nerves, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The night had changed something in her, and the feeling of unease would linger long after the party ended. The following days were a blur of unease for Samantha. The event had left a mark on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia that now clung to her. Every time she walked into the office, she felt the weight of eyes on her, the whisper of judgment in the air. She avoided certain colleagues, walking a different route to her desk, and kept her head down, trying to disappear into the background. The safe cocoon of her home was the only place where she could relax, but even there, the fear remained, gnawing at her whenever she thought about the party. She hadn't realized just how much the night had shaken her until it became impossible to ignore. The sense of vulnerability, of being powerless in a situation where she should have been safe, was something she couldn't simply brush aside. It haunted her in quiet moments, reminding her that the world wasn't as safe as she once believed. The experience had shaken Samantha to her core, and as the days passed, she struggled to regain her confidence. She made the difficult decision to distance herself from her colleagues, not just physically, but emotionally. It was a painful realization that the company she had once admired was no longer the place she had hoped it would be. She considered her future there, wondering if the risk was worth the emotional toll. At home, Chris remained her anchor, offering support while respecting her need to process the ordeal. Slowly, Samantha began to take small steps to reclaim control over her life, but the scars from that night were invisible, yet deep. The event had forever changed how she viewed her workplace and the safety she had once taken for granted. She knew it wouldn't be easy to move forward, but she was determined to rebuild her life, piece by piece, one step at a time.